Did a noblewoman in medieval Europe really bathe in blood to stay young? For centuries, this question has echoed through history, whispered in books, retold in films, and repeated as one of the darkest legends ever told. But what if the most shocking detail of all, the bloodbath itself, never appeared in a single historical record from her lifetime? What if the truth behind the legend of Elizabeth Báthory is far more complex, political, and human than the story that made her famous? This is the real account of the woman often called the Blood Countess, and it begins long before the first rumor was ever spoken. Elizabeth Báthory was born in 1560 into one of the most powerful families in the Kingdom of Hungary. Her relatives included high-ranking church officials, respected military leaders, and even a prince of Transylvania. From childhood, she was surrounded by influence and expectation. She received an education most women of her time could never dream of: lessons in reading, writing, multiple languages, estate management, and diplomacy. She grew up not just in luxury, but in a world where political power flowed through her family like blood through their veins. At the age of 15, she married Ferenc Nadasdy, a rising military commander from another elite Hungarian family. Their marriage was not only a union of two individuals, but the merging of two powerful houses. As part of her wedding gift, Elizabeth received Cachtice Castle and several surrounding villages. While her husband spent years away fighting wars against Ottoman forces, Elizabeth ruled these lands alone. She handled taxes, settled disputes, oversaw farming operations, and controlled vast financial networks. By every account from her early life, she was a disciplined and capable landowner who commanded respect. When Ferenc Nadasdy died in 1604, Elizabeth became a widow with immense authority and immense vulnerability. Without her husband's political protection, she faced growing financial pressure, outstanding debts, and shifting alliances within the Hungarian nobility. This was a dangerous time for any wealthy landowner, especially a woman. It was during these years that whispers began to spread. Some young women working in her household reportedly fell ill or died. A few servants disappeared. Rural regions in the 1600s were filled with rumors, superstition, and fear, especially when it came to noble estates. Death was common in a world without modern medicine, and explanations were often shaped by imagination rather than evidence, but the stories grew. By 1609, murmurs about strange happenings at Cachtice Castle reached the highest levels of Hungarian power. In 1610, King Matthias II ordered an investigation. He sent György Thurzo, a prominent nobleman and member of a family connected to the Bathorys, to gather evidence. Over the following months, Thurzo collected testimonies from servants, villagers, and others linked to the estate. Many of the testimonies were secondhand, repeating what someone else had heard. Some were contradictory. A few were likely influenced by fear or pressure. But one thing is absolutely clear in the historical record: none of the official documents from that time mention Elizabeth bathing in blood. That detail does not appear anywhere in 17th century sources. The infamous blood legend, so iconic today, would only be written down more than 100 years later. On December 30th, 1610, Thurzo arrived at Cachtice Castle to confront Elizabeth. According to his own reports, he claimed he found disturbing conditions. But the descriptions he wrote at the time were limited and far less dramatic than the legends retold centuries later. Elizabeth was immediately placed under house arrest. She was never given a public trial. No courtroom testimony from her exists. The nobles around her likely feared the political consequences of putting someone of her rank on trial. A public scandal could damage powerful families, ignite conflicts, or expose debts owed by the king to Elizabeth's estate. Silence and confinement became the solution. Elizabeth lived the remainder of her life locked inside a small section of her castle. She wrote letters to officials and family members maintaining her innocence. She requested visitors. She asked for fair treatment. She insisted that the accusations were exaggerated or fabricated. Whether she was guilty of cruelty, the victim of political maneuvering, or something in between is still debated by historians today. But what is not debated is this: the blood-bathing story was not part of the world she lived in. It was not part of the investigation. It was not written by Thurzo. It was not written by the king. It was not written by any court official. It came later. Elizabeth Báthory died in 1614 at the age of 54. She was buried quietly, with little ceremony. Her name faded into local memory. For decades, she was known only through family archives and scattered documents. But more than a century after her death, during the rise of Gothic literature in the 1700s and early 1800s, writers rediscovered her story. And in a Europe obsessed with tales of haunted castles, secret rituals, and monstrous nobility, the old accounts were rewritten for dramatic effect. This was when the legend of the bloodbath first appeared. Writers embellished her story, adding fictional scenes of obsession, cruelty, and ritual. They turned a noblewoman confined under political suspicion into a supernatural villain designed to fit the popular imagination of the time. Each generation added more. Each retelling drifted further from documented history. Elizabeth became larger than life, less a person and more a nightmare sculpted by those who came long after she died. So who was Elizabeth Báthory truly? Truly. Was she guilty of cruelty toward those in her household? It is possible, even likely, given the harsh treatment common in noble households at the time. Was she a calculating murderer driven by obsession? There is no definitive evidence to prove it. Was she framed by powerful men who wanted her land, her wealth, and her political influence weakened? Many historians think this is a real possibility. What we know for certain is that the story told today, the story of a woman bathing in blood to preserve her beauty, is not a historical fact. It is a legend that grew in the shadows of time. The real horror of Elizabeth Báthory's story is not the mythical ritual attributed to her. It is the way history can be reshaped, exaggerated, and transformed until the truth becomes almost impossible to recognize. A powerful woman of her era, navigating a dangerous world of politics, alliances, and suspicion, became a figure of terror created by writers who lived long after her. Her life, her actions, and even her identity were rewritten for entertainment. The so-called queen who bathed in blood was never a queen, and the blood that made her infamous never appeared in the records of her own century. Her name became a canvas upon which later generations painted their darkest fantasies. And her story stands today as a reminder that legends grow fastest where facts are forgotten, and that sometimes the most frightening history is not the reality of what happened, but the myth we choose to remember instead.